Welcome to this edition of Knappily Weekly. The topic that we are going to discuss today is unfortunately not a matter of life and death. It's a matter of death and death. The Supreme Court of India in a landmark judgment has allowed passive euthanasia in India along with a lot of terms and conditions to ensure that it is not misused. While the topic has been raging in India as it has been across the world for a really long time now, this is definitely a definite move forward when it comes to granting people the right to die with dignity. While it has been appreciated a lot, it has also triggered the good old debate on who should be the appropriate authority, the appropriate agency on deciding when is one going to die. Alongside the complication that Indian Penal Code, the Penal Code of India brings in, which has so far criminalized the act of suicide, which obviously will be decriminalized before any affirmative action is taken on the Supreme Court order. It's tough to not get philosophical about death, and even if you are a justice of the Supreme Court of India, you are carried away by the emotions, the strong emotions that come when you are discussing life and death. And the Supreme Court in its verdict they start the discussion on this controversial topic by citing many verses and quotes and poems and excerpts from various authors and philosophers. I've just picked up a few which I really liked. And the first one just says that if you are not alive, then why are you scared of death? There's nobody to get scared when you are dead. When you are alive anyway, you are not dead. Why should you be scared? The court starts the discussion on this note. The court also mentions that death itself dies. Once death is done, death itself is over. But it also then concludes. It quotes Lord Tennyson's poem and says that no human actually truly wishes to die. Having said that, the court actually examines what compels certain individuals to decide to end their life, and it then focuses on the valid reason, which it concludes that there's only one valid reason when the life as it is to be sustained is hardly going to be productive, and you are going to depend on others for your existence, which probably you are not going to like, because you will be either in a vegetative state or in terrible pain because you are terminally ill. So the Supreme Court gets into a lengthy discussion on the ethics, the philosophy, the legal history of passive euthanasia, and finally agrees that passive euthanasia should be granted, the right to exercise passive euthanasia should be granted to the citizens of India. However, it lays down many tough terms and conditions to prevent its misuse. So what exactly is the verdict? This is a quote from the Supreme Court's verdict itself. Mere existence does not amount to presence. Just because you are lying in a vegetative state in a hospital and your relatives think there is still some hope, does not mean that you are present in this world. So who has the right to decide on whether you should continue in this state or not? According to the Supreme Court, it is you, and you have to take a call when you can. So what does the verdict say? The verdict says that if you are terminally ill or you are in a persistent vegetative state, you can be allowed to not live, to not prolong the misery, if you have already executed what is called the living will, and what the Supreme Court prefers to call an advanced medical directive, or just casually advanced directive. If you have already done that, then you will be allowed to die. You will be allowed to not let your relatives prolong your existence on this earth beyond the point where it is clear that not much is going to. There's no hope of you coming back to active life in the coming years. And now this petition was filed by the NGO Common Cause. They have been fighting for this cause for a long time. Their argument is simple, that it's my body, it's my life, it's my death, and if I understand, if as a rational person I understand that I may never be able to have the active life I once had and I will have to just bear the pain or the humiliation of continuously depending on doctors, nurses, and more importantly my relatives, I should be allowed to refuse medical treatment that simply prolongs my delays my death, which is inevitable anyway. So this is what is called passive euthanasia, to allow the doctors or the relatives to withdraw medical support, so that a person who is terminally ill without any hope or is in a vegetative state ceases to exist, because it's just existence, it's not presence, as the Supreme Court has said. That is called passive euthanasia, and the verdict was on expected lines. All the 5 judges on the bench agreed that India should now allow passive euthanasia. There was no dissenting judgment delivered in this case. And now came the point of how to decide who should be allowed to die. And in this case, so incidentally, even the government of India said it is for passive euthanasia, but the government disagreed that the citizens of India should be allowed to create a living will, because the government feels it is going to generate a lot of practical problems going forward, where this provision can be misused. But the court said that the court's logic was simple: how can you allow passive euthanasia but not allow a living will? Because that's the only connection. That's an established worldwide, the best practice in passive euthanasia is to allow to have a living will. So the court said that till such time that the government brings in a legislation, the Supreme Court itself took it upon itself to lay down the guidelines for what the court prefers to call the advance directive and what is casually known as the living will. And now, before we get to what is the advance directive and what is a living will, let us understand how progressive the verdict is. Now, not too long ago, because in 1994 came the landmark Gyan Kaur versus State of Punjab verdict, where the Supreme Court itself said that right to die does not emerge from the right to life, which is granted by Article 21 of the Constitution of India. The Supreme Court said the right to die with dignity cannot be associated with right to having a dignified life. And right now in 2018, the Supreme Court has reversed a decision. The Gyan Kaur's case was a reversal of the P. Ratnam versus Union of India case, where the bench had said that it is time for India to do away with Article 3 with Section 309 of Indian Penal Code, which criminalizes suicide. According to Section 309, if you are attempting suicide and you somehow manage to not die even after that attempt, you will be penalized by the government. You will be put behind bars for attempting suicide. It's a legacy. It is of the British era, because the Indian Penal Code was designed during the time of the Victorian ethics prevailing in the United Kingdom, and where life was sacrosanct. So in any case, the Section 309 was not struck down because of the Gyan Kaur judgment, and subsequently now the government has come to the conclusion anyway, because of many other Supreme Court verdicts where they asked the government to relook whether Section 309 is needed or not. However, Gyan Kaur was regressive in the sense that it disallowed the citizens of India to decide, even whatever be the case. There were no conditionalities attached, and whatever be the case, they were not allowed to end their life. That was Gyan Kaur judgment. Then came another landmark judgment in 2011, a name with which most of us are familiar. Aruna Shanbog, the nurse of KEM hospital, who was sexually assaulted by a hospital staff, and she got into a vegetative state and remained so since 1973. She passed away a couple of years ago, but she spent close to 4 decades as a vegetable, in a vegetative state, completely paralyzed, completely dependent on the hospital staff. And the story of how the nurses of her hospital took care of Aruna Shanbog is inspirational in itself. They sacrificed their careers, they took turns, they ensured that whatever happened, Aruna Shanbog was taken care of. But the activist Pinky Virani, who had filed the case, her argument was that who knows whether Aruna Shanbhag actually would have wanted to continue in this state. 4 decades as a vegetable lying on a hospital bed would probably not have been, it is just rational to assume that nobody would agree to such a, if we can call it that, such a life. So Pinky Virani had filed a case in the Supreme Court, and it was in this verdict that the court said, the apex court said that in certain exceptional cases, passive euthanasia can be allowed, and it laid down terms and conditions when it came to passive euthanasia. So these two are the landmark cases. So Aruna Shanbhag case gave a positive momentum to having passive euthanasia as a general practice in India, and in 2018 we actually have that in India. So a lot of movement has happened in this case, and the concern right now for many activists is that, and we'll come to that very soon, whether this also leads to active euthanasia in the coming years. The court has been very clear that it's only allowing passive euthanasia, that too with many terms and conditions. So what exactly is passive euthanasia? You would definitely have come across certain cases, maybe distant relatives, or you would have heard of people who have been kept on ventilator support for days, months, sometimes years. Now, what does it mean? It simply means that if that support is withdrawn, the person will be no more. So passive euthanasia is in a way withdrawing that support which is artificially keeping a person alive, just by ensuring that certain metrics. You can put a tick mark against certain metrics. The person is breathing, the person has a heartbeat. However, there is no sensory activity there. The person is hardly aware of what is happening. So if you withdraw that support, it's a case of passive euthanasia. So there are two aspects to this. Either you withdraw a support which is artificially keeping the person alive, or you do not do something which probably would keep the patient alive. Which can be a critical operation, it can be administering certain critical medicine which will simply keep the person alive, mostly as a vegetable, or maybe in terrible pain, but somehow keeping the person alive is the only objective. So this is passive euthanasia, just not allowing somebody to continue forcing existence upon you because you have willed it before you have got into that situation. That's what the Supreme Court says. If you have already made provisions for what should happen to you when you are in such an unfortunate condition, then it becomes easy for everybody to decide what should be done with your body, because now people have what is called the living will. So the Supreme Court has given proper guidelines on what comprises a living will, but more or less, what is a living will? You foresee a situation in which you will not be able to communicate to your relatives and to your doctors about what you expect your treatment to be, and maybe you are in such a situation where it is absolutely not possible to continue living the way you would want to, and therefore you have made this provision before you have got into that situation. That is your living will. So understand this very clearly. What the Supreme Court has said is that if you are somebody who thinks that you would never want to be in a situation of Aruna Shanbhag, then you rather make a living will and make it very clear about what is going to happen to you in such a condition. Now, Aruna Shanbhag case is extremely important because both the sides have their points of view. The nurses of her hospital said that she would have wanted to live, that Aruna Shanbhag would have wanted to live. They also said that she responds to music, she smiles sometimes, she's happy the way she is, while Pinky Virani said that they are inflicting a torture upon her body and her soul, and she should be allowed to go. So both the sides had their own points of view, and both the sides appeared to be very selfish. The point was that the person who actually should have taken a call just could not take any call. Right? So now the Supreme Court says you can take a call when you are active and alert, and when you are not in that situation. So that is a living will, where you make it very clear what kind of medical treatment do you expect to be administered to you when you are terminally ill, or when you are no longer able to express informed consent to those who are taking care of you, your relatives or the doctors. It also includes, it's not necessary that it should include, but it also includes authorizing your family or someone, and making it very specific who exactly in your family will be switching off life support. If it has come to that unfortunate end of medical treatment, then you have made it very clear who is going to decide on switching off life support for you. The government's point is equally valid in this case, and I can safely predict going forward we will find another landmark case coming up from somewhere where the provision has been misused by somebody. The government says a living will be misused, and the government will be unable to prevent that. Now, how can it be misused? So let us say there are a lot of there are people who are poor, and they are so in their case, the doctors and the relatives can probably conspire to ensure that there is a fudged living will which has been produced, because the person they wouldn't want to bear the financial burden of this person. Or the other case, where a very rich person is terminally ill, lying there trying to fight it out, but the relatives are in a rush to acquire the property, and therefore they misuse this provision. There are a lot of ethical aspects, but the government's point of view is practical, that the government may not be able to verify in each case, and unfortunately, like is the case with capital punishment, if it is found out later that the living will was fudged, it may be too late to reverse anything about it. So that's the government's point of view. The Supreme Court did not heed to the government's point of view, for the simple reason that if passive euthanasia has to be allowed in India, the living will becomes necessary. The government informed the court that it is also coming up with a bill, the Management of Patients with Terminal Illness, Withdrawal of Medical Life Support Bill, shortly. And the court said that while the government can do that, meanwhile the directives have been laid down by the apex court itself. And again, the point is that this is a sample of a living will. This is not from India. Of course, in the case of India, it is to be still, the structure has to be still laid down. How exactly will it be? Will it look like? What are the provisions which should be there? The Supreme Court has given the guidelines, but we are yet to see the first living will in India. But in general, it's a global practice. The Supreme Court, this is not an innovation in global legal history. Many European countries have allowed this, but inevitably it comes down to somebody having a terminal condition or an end stage condition, or somebody being in a persistent vegetative state, which means that the person is paralyzed completely for many years, or is expected to be paralyzed for many years without any hope for recovery. So this is has to be clearly stated in the living will. Who is going to decide is going to be clearly stated in the living will, and it does not mean that the death has to be painful and suddenly you withdraw the life support. It also usually says that the person should be allowed to die naturally and with minimum pain, as less pain as possible, with a lot of palliative care. That is the purpose of living will. This is how a living will actually looks like. Of course, in India we will find it customized to India's the Supreme Court's directive. So the Supreme Court has told what should the advance directive contain. Now, first of all, not anybody can issue the advance directive for their end of life treatment. It has to be an adult. It has to be an adult who has been proved and approved to be of a sound mind, and the person should be in a position to communicate, relate and comprehend the purpose of and the consequences of executing the document. This is now this is not necessarily something which needs to be done when you are completely healthy. Let's say you are going for a surgery where the doctors tell that if the surgery goes wrong you may be paralyzed. So in that case you are still able to think rationally, you can comprehend all information. So maybe at that time you give the advance directive or what happens if you get into such a situation. Again, it should be voluntarily executed. It should not be done with any coercion. Nobody should force you to have this will. There is nothing binding here, and it should be done with full knowledge or information, which means that you have considered all the medical options, and then you have decided that if I come to this state, it may not be possible in the next many years for me to recover from it, and then in that case I authorize my family member to end my life, to let me go. Now, even as we can pause here and we can see the complications involved here. Voluntarily executed, without any coercion or inducement or compulsion. But imagine somebody who is financially dependent on others going for a surgery. This can easily be forced upon the person. Many situations can be imagined where people can be forced to come up with such a will. How, if at all, can the government prevent this misuse? So the court goes into more details, but the greater the detail, the bigger will be the loopholes that emerge and that can be exploited. So that we will see in the coming years how this is to be executed. Right, so and the circumstances have to be clearly stated. It should be clear. It should be specific under which condition can the life support be withdrawn or the person be allowed to die naturally. Otherwise, the medical board or the hospital is just not allowed to let go of the person. Only the guardian or close relative authorized by the person who gave the advance directive can decide, and nobody else can decide on what is to be done with the advance directive. This directive should be recorded and preserved, which means there should be an authority. We will very soon see an authority being created to ensure that everything is digitized and recorded. Again, there are provisions where there are legal representatives who will act as witnesses. There will be 2 witnesses. There has to be a counter signature done by the judicial magistrate of first class appointed by the district judge. So all these terms and conditions have been laid down. The court has even gone to the extent of imagining that the person who was authorized also becomes terminally ill. What is to be done in that case? So in that case, the court says a medical board will be constituted and which will advise the family on what is to be done about this. The court also allows the family to go to the High Court to contest the opinion of the medical board if they do not concur with the opinion of the medical board. It also goes into the situation where there is no advance directive. What is to be done? But that case was laid down in 2011 itself. It was clarified that the hospital will come up with a medical board. The board will examine the conditions, will get into the possibility of reviving the person in the coming years, and then will submit its report. And again, the High Court will come into play if the family does not agree. So the Supreme Court has held that to be valid even right now. So even if a person does not have an advance directive, the hospital medical board will take a call, and the board will be very specifically constituted. It cannot be decided by the family members who will be the members of the board. The court also makes it clear, extremely clear, that administering poison or injecting anything which takes away the life of the terminally ill or vegetative person is just not allowed. No one is permitted to cause death of another person, including even a physician is not allowed by administering the patient with any lethal drug, which simply means that the court says active euthanasia is illegal in India. You cannot inject something and kill person. You cannot actually suffocate somebody to death. And it's only about passive euthanasia in India. With this verdict, India joins a select few countries of the world who allow passive euthanasia. Along with, quite obviously, all the countries have various terms and conditions imposed to ensure this happens. India's case will be more complicated because of the huge diversity of the population, as well as the huge size and the lack of awareness which comes naturally with a lot of poverty and lack of education. So these things will complicate India's case, but India is joining the ranks of many European countries such as Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, which was the first country to allow passive euthanasia with terms and conditions. Canada, which has a very liberal mechanism in place. Switzerland, of course, once upon a time people used to go to Switzerland to die because it allowed even active euthanasia to a certain extent. So India is joining these countries, and that probably is a good thing. But only time will will deliver the judgment on how effectively this has been implemented. While that we can wait for, we can right now go into the specifics of the debate on euthanasia, which means should euthanasia be allowed first of all? If it is allowed, should it be active or passive? In India's case, the Supreme Court, the law of the land, now says that passive should be allowed. Regardless of this, the debate will continue on who is the agency on life, who grants life and who takes life. That will continue. So now in this part of the program, we'll get into the good old debate on euthanasia.
He gave her a single shot. It was enough adrenaline to do the job a few times over.
So as you saw in this clip, the person who was terminating the life of the patient, he did two things. First, he withdrew life support, and second, he administered the injection, the lethal injection. So what we're saying right now, in India, you can do the first one if there is a living will. You're just not allowed to administer a lethal injection. In either case, it presents a moral dilemma, an ethical dilemma on whether or not this practice should be allowed. So we'll get into the practical arguments, the ethical arguments, even the religious arguments on euthanasia. So what is euthanasia? As we can conclude by now, it's when a person is intentionally allowed to die or is killed. Allowed to die is passive and is killed is active, because it is believed that the individual would be better off dead than alive. Now the point is that nobody knows what happens after death. Now that's the most common. If you know the answer, please put it in the comment. But nobody knows what happens after you are dead, and that complicates a lot of things. Let's say if we know actually that there's a heaven awaiting us, there would have been no debate. So even this argument that the person will be better off dead than alive can be debated right away. But let's not get into that. The other point is that no one is worse off as a result of this. Not the family members who were, of course, even leaving aside the financial burden, they couldn't stand that their dear one is suffering on a day-to-day basis. So they are not worse off. The person anyway is mentally not present. It has just been forced somehow to stay alive. So that person is not. In the case of active euthanasia, of course, that becomes a different matter altogether. Now the point is, most people think, and many surveys across the world, we can also, even if I were to ask you, you would say yes to whether passive voluntary euthanasia should be allowed. What's the meaning of passive voluntary euthanasia? Passive means it's not active. It's withdrawal of life support or not doing something which keeps you alive. Voluntary means you have willed it in written, or your relatives know it anyway. So most people say this is morally permissible. Why let the person's body suffer when the person is gone? Even passive non-voluntary euthanasia, which means that there is no living will, but the family members take a call that now we can't let this person suffer so much. That is also considered to be morally permissible by most people. In many surveys it has been found out that. But of course, when it comes to that, to what extent after the family has tried their best, it is all right if they let go of the person's body, because mostly everything else is gone. The debate mostly is on what is called active voluntary euthanasia or active non-voluntary euthanasia, and there is another category too. So should it go to that level? So if you are confused about this, let's consider this table. So active, passive, we know by now. Active is administering a lethal injection. Just to keep it simple, passive is withdrawing life support or not doing something necessary to keep a patient alive. Voluntary means I have willed it. Non-voluntary means I have not willed it. I did not make any provision for this. I have not been able to communicate clearly what I want. That is non-voluntary. So Aruna Schonbach's case would be non-voluntary. Involuntary is a different case altogether. Involuntary means I have said. So in my living will, I can actually write whatever happens. I am an optimist. I think medical science can do miracle. Nobody should be allowed to withdraw life support. That can be a part of my living will, right? So then in that case it means I want to be kept alive no matter what, however whatever be your financial burden. You keep cursing me all your life, but you have to keep me alive all your life if you can. So that would, and in that case, so it means I have made it very clear I'm not going to let anybody withdraw life support or let anybody not do the best they can to keep me alive. So voluntary, non-voluntary and involuntary. Now the point is, there's hardly any debate in the world right now about passive voluntary euthanasia. So India has now allowed it. So A consents. So A allows to. So what A says, the patient says, is that B is allowed to withdraw life support when things become unbearable, when it is not possible to have any hope any further. Then it's passive voluntary euthanasia. Passive non-voluntary euthanasia is that family members acting in goodwill as advised by a competent board of doctors take a call that now, as per the existing standards of medical science, the progress of medical science, it is not possible to see how this person can be revived in the coming years. So that is passive non-voluntary euthanasia. The problem is with the active part. The active voluntary euthanasia means that so A is saying B will actually kill me. So it's not letting me die, it's saying that B will kill me. So what the so-called mercy killing, that is active voluntary euthanasia. So there's a couple in Mumbai that the couple say they have been fighting for active, the Lavates, Iravati and Narayan Lavate, they're in Maharashtra. So they want the Supreme Court to allow active voluntary euthanasia because they think their logic is simple. They like each other a lot. They think sooner or later there will be a terminal illness and then they will become dependent on their family. They hardly have any family. They do not have children. They do not want to be in such a position, and they say that we have had a very happy life. We have had a very happy life. We have no regrets. Now let us now we want to die together. That's they have petitioned the president. They have approached the Supreme Court. They are disappointed by this verdict. The Lavates, the couple, is disappointed by the verdict. But what they are essentially asking for is active voluntary euthanasia. And of course, the Supreme Court cannot decide on a case-to-case basis in this. Active voluntary euthanasia is something which we are not going to find the Supreme Court allowing, at least in the coming future, in the near future. So the problem, the thing is, what should be done with active voluntary euthanasia? So the point is, if you are letting me withdraw life support, why are you not letting? And this is what the couple also they are saying, that what's wrong with that? We want, it's our body. We think we have lived our life, and now we want to kill each. And they have actually threatened that we will kill each other. We will take cyanide if it is easily available. We'll kill each other anyway. How can you stop it? The point is that active voluntary euthanasia is, in a way, allowing somebody to murder you. So it's something which is to be treated with a lot of caution. Non-voluntary active euthanasia is again a bigger no-go area, where it says that the relative takes a call to kill this person without knowing what this person would have wanted. So that is your active non-violent, which means I inject a lethal injection in the body of a relative who is suffering a lot, because I do not want to see the person suffer, all with good intent, but it's in a way it's murder. I am murdering this person because I can't see the person suffer. That is active non-voluntary euthanasia. Now involuntary is simply murder, plain and simple. Involuntary is murder. Why is it murder? Because I have told very clearly I do not want to either life support be withdrawn, or I do not want to be killed by my relatives, and my relatives somehow are very enthusiastic to not let me suffer, so they kill me. That simply put is active and passive involuntary euthanasia. It can be safely assumed that no legal jurisdiction is ever going to allow involuntary active and passive euthanasia. That is murder, plain and simple. So right now in India it's passive voluntary euthanasia. The debate will very soon go to passive non-voluntary euthanasia, but the court already has made it clear that the medical board of the hospital will take a call on this. It's a very stringent set of conditions that have been put in place there. So it's not going to be easy to get that approval. So that's the status right now. Now let's get into the arguments against euthanasia, and these are let's first get into the practical arguments, very valid arguments, and you have to somehow say that these points also make sense. Now the first point is that in 2018 there is proper palliative care available, which means that if we are talking about a terminally ill patient suffering a lot, that suffering can be reduced by a lot more than it would have been many decades ago, or even a few decades ago. So the component of pain has come down drastically. So when we say that the person will suffer, then it's we forget that palliative care has advanced by a lot in the last few decades. Of course, when a person is in a vegetative state, then we do not know what this is going to entail. But in the case of a terminally ill person who is in a lot of pain, that pain can be substantially reduced. So the argument of pain, unbearable pain, probably does not cut much of ice in the face of this argument. Now the other point is that we have discussed it already. There is no proper way of properly regulating euthanasia. We will find this happening in India. It's not going to be possible. In Switzerland there was a doctor. He was casually called Dr. Death because he made it a profession to administer active euthanasia to a lot of people, and he had visitors from across the world. He had taken it upon himself that it was in a way it was his passion that he would kill people to relieve them of pain. There was no way to actually prevent this from happening. It was revealed much later. So how can you prevent? So there are a lot of stakeholders involved. The patient, of course, who is not properly aware at the time. And by the way, the Supreme Court has also said that the patient can change their mind. It is not that if you have created a living will, that let me be allowed to die, you cannot change your mind later. You can change your mind, but in that situation you are not in a position to change your living will. That may be executed, even though you probably want to tell your relatives that do not be so eager, do not be to let go of me, at least try somewhat more. That is not going to happen. Then the doctors are involved. The doctors in India, or in any case, the doctors are also humans. They are also corruptible. How do we ensure that everybody is acting in good faith and in the best interest of the patient? So it's going to be extremely difficult. The government cannot be getting into every room of every hospital to ensure this is not being misused. Now another argument is very valid. It says that it means that there will be less good care provided to the terminally ill. Because this option is available, people will not try as hard as they do right now to ensure that the terminally ill are provided for. They at least they are well taken care of when the option is not available. The other argument is also very practical, that let us say if the whole world agrees to passive euthanasia, and everybody has created a living will. Everybody has a living will that if I am in such a situation, let go of me. Just do not. what will happen to medical research? What will happen to science, medical science, the development of the progress of medical science? Most progress of medical science has been made because there were certain diseases which at the time were considered terminal, but scientists refused to give up. Now there may not be. If it becomes a part of global culture, then what's the need anyway? So that can be so let us say the desperation to find a universal cure for all cancers may be slowed down as a result of this. So that is one argument. Then again, that this gives too much power to doctors. The doctors can play God and devil. Here, do we really want the doctors to decide on this? So there is something called the Hippocratic Oath. The doctor's duty is to save lives and do nothing else. In this case, the doctors decide on whether or not to continue to allow the patients to live. Should we give so much power to doctors? We will find many instances of doctors acting in connivance with the relatives of the patient to let go of. Now the counterpoint to this is that in any case it happens. How do we prevent this from happening? There are so many hospitals, so many doctors, patients are put on life support, and the relatives would say, we do not want to continue with life support because we just cannot pay your bill, and the doctors let go of the patient. So in any case it happens is the counterpoint to this argument. And the other argument is that it exposes vulnerable people, it puts them under a lot of pressure to end their lives. Now who are these people? Elderly relatives. So they may be under a lot of pressure to prepare a living will because they do not want to be a burden on their family members. So maybe most people as they touch 60 they start preparing a living will. Otherwise they would not have done it, and otherwise they may think that the family members would think that they somehow want to be a burden on their family members. So that is one. And the other is there is always a lot of pressure on the terminally ill patients to free up medical resources. That why are you occupying this? There are others who can possibly be saved. You just cannot be saved. Why should you prolong this? Just go to the next stage of whatever comes after life. And the third part is that the patients may actually think this is the final solution. They may think that if there is no hope, just go for this. This is the final solution to their problems. So these are all practical problems against euthanasia. Then there are the ethical arguments against euthanasia. The first one is that it weakens society's respect for the sanctity of life. We may take life very casually. A person falls really sick, is terminally ill, let go of the person. So we may take it very, very, very casually, and this may become a part of our culture. As a human species, we may lose our respect for the sanctity of life. And it also is in a way violates the right to equality. It simply means that those who are afflicted with diseases, those who are not productive, they are less than equal to the others. Of course, anybody can be sick, anybody can get terminally ill. Nobody chooses to be in that sense, to be in that state. But having euthanasia simply accepts it, that certain members of the society, the ones who are terminally ill, the ones who are paralyzed, they are not considered equal to those who are not. So what kind of species do we become if we do this? Even we find in many species of animals, they do not give up on their relatives. There are many touching stories, many touching YouTube videos with millions of views, where you find animals not giving up on their relatives. Why should we as humans do that? That's the argument. Then there is the classic argument of a slippery slope. It simply means that we start with passive euthanasia. We put a lot of terms and conditions on when can it be allowed, when can it not be allowed. But in a way we are allowing suicide. Then we will say let's allow other kinds of suicide too, and finally it will go to active euthanasia, active non-voluntary euthanasia, and it may even go to active involuntary euthanasia, which means murder may become acceptable to the society. That I can murder somebody who I think is occupying a lot of resources, is useless to the society, and I may think I am doing a service to even that person's family or the whole society. So this may be the beginning of a slippery slope. Then the argument is that it is not in the person's best interests. How do you know this is in the person's best interest? What if tomorrow a treatment emerges? There are so many clinical trials happening, even for the deadliest of cancers. We often come across, we do it on Knappily itself. We cover a lot of stories where breakthroughs have happened in treatment of the most malignant of cancers. What if tomorrow there's a breakthrough? What if clinical trial can save the person? Just be a part of a clinical trial of a new drug and it can be saved. How does the person even know it's in the person's best interest? That's the argument. And again, the classic argument is that how do you know death is in the best interest? Maybe what happens after death makes you regret that the vegetative state was better. So there's no way to ascertain, since death is opaque. What happened beyond that is opaque. We do not know what is in the best interest and what is not. Right? It also affects other people's rights, not just that of the patient, but other people's rights. I have decided to terminate my life in such a condition, but my relatives who love me a lot, they may not want that to happen. But here is a living will which is to be executed. So it also is affecting other people's rights, which is their right to have to take care of me. So this is another ethical argument against euthanasia. And then come the priests, the religious arguments. These arguments these days are usually dismissed, but there is no concrete way to even argue with these arguments. One can argue depending on whether you are a believer or a disbeliever, but in this case it usually comes down to the word and the will of God. So if you are somebody who believes in God, whichever religion you are following, your religion says life is sacrosanct. Nobody can grant it, nobody can take it other than God Himself. That is the first argument. And in this argument, all the religions are united. They say that you cannot, by taking your life, you are denying God the right over your life. And God is the only agency who can decide how long you are supposed to live. God can do a miracle if it is required. Who are you to deny God of that opportunity? That's the classic argument used here. Christianity believes that everything has a place in God's plan, and suffering is needed to be one with Christ, who Himself suffered. So that is Christianity. Islam believes again that all human life is sacred because it is given by Allah, and only Allah will choose how long somebody is supposed to live. Hinduism actually goes one step further than that. So if you are a true follower of Hinduism, it says that if you are not suffering enough, there is a plan. If you have not suffered as much as you are required to, then your stock of karma is not exhausted. You will be born again and you will be made to suffer again. So why would you not exhaust that stock of bad karma? But more importantly, it also says that the person who takes life, let's say the doctor who withdraws life support, will also earn bad karma. Right, so that makes it even all the more complicated, that who is going to withdraw life support. The patient has said you withdraw. The patient is all right with having bad karma as per Hinduism, but the person who withdraws life support will get bad karma too. That's the argument of Hinduism. But again, it is one instance where all the religions of the world are united that euthanasia cannot be allowed, passive or active. It just can't be allowed, except probably for Jainism. In Jainism, there's this practice of Santhara, where they say that gradually you reduce your food intake till your life is exhausted. That's how you do penance. That's how you rid yourself of all your sins. But again, there's a prescribed way to do it. It's not that the family members will say that you are locked somewhere and you cannot eat and then you die. So there's a prescribed way of doing it there. And then the other argument is, anyway, suffering may have a value. How do you know that suffering does not have a value? So maybe you are redeemed of all your sins. Maybe you go to heaven after all. Maybe after death there is a heaven and a hell, and you want to go to heaven. Why would you choose otherwise? This is the classic religious argument to dissuade people from killing others or killing themselves. So this comes to religious argument. So as we see, the practical arguments, the ethical arguments, the religious arguments, it's not very easy to compete against these. But the world is now has actually moved to a level where passive euthanasia is accepted under strict terms and conditions. The only problem there again is practical. How do you implement it? How do you prevent its misuse? So that is the overall summary of the ethical aspects of this debate. I do hope you live forever. The best way to do that is to create something which will outlast you, or to fall in love with a poet. One of my favorite last lines, not that I keep reading the last lines of dying people all the time, but my favorite last line is, "And now I shall know." So we will know what happens after death when we get there, and all of us will get there, like it or not. The Supreme Court says nobody wants to get there, but we will get there. Meanwhile, I hope you have now enough information to understand why passive euthanasia has been allowed in India, and why active euthanasia at this moment cannot be allowed in India, the various complications associated with it. Keep living, keep loving, keep liking our videos. Do let me know the topics you want us to analyze in the coming episodes. So catch you again in the next episode of Knappily Weekly. Thank you.